I got started because of my interest in the history of department stores and retail history. And somebody in my family had saved a couple of cards for some local department stores here, and they gave them to me. And I guess that it just kind of went from there. And I found through a collectibles book, I found out that there were uh, other people that collected credit cards. I didn't think anybody else probably did that except me, but I did find out there was a guy out of Texas that had a newsletter that he put out about credit card collecting. And
Nice.
like I said, it was the late 80s, early 90s that this bi-monthly, I guess, newsletter was put out. And then in 1993, there were the couple of collectors decided to have a convention, and it was in Richmond, Virginia. And that was the first time a large group of collectors had gotten together. And at the time, they also had phone cards in with the credit card collecting. But that kind of went by the wayside pretty quickly. But anyway, at the end of that meeting, 30 years ago, this September, uh, they decided to form a organization, which the next year in Orlando, Florida, they had another convention, and that's when the organization was officially formed. And I
How
was there
many?
for that. I was about 22 years old, I guess, at the time.
You've been doing it
So I was
for a
pretty,
long
so I was
time,
pretty
30
young.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can tell behind you have quite a collection just from this view. Now I have my signs behind me, but it's nothing compared to what you have back there. That's really impressive. Um, so
Yeah. I've
I'm
always
curious.
enjoyed displaying my cards. A lot of people don't do that. They just keep them in their notebooks or whatever, but I like displaying them, being able to look
It's
at them.
impressive. Yeah, it's great. And it really, and we'll get into more about the history, but it kind of helps to track the history because it's not like all of this is documented and all of these cards without someone like you. I think the history would just be, we wouldn't even know that a department store maybe had a card or what it looked like or anything like that.
Yeah. Those cards, like particularly like from department stores, because most of those have all went out of business now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's just a handful of department stores, and most of them are nationwide. You know, Macy's, Dillard's, Kohl's. That it's not nearly as interesting as it was when every town had two or three local department stores, and many of them had credit cards. Even some pretty small stores had credit cards.
Yeah.
So, and that's sometimes the only thing left now of those stores. You know, something with that logo, that name on it, and it's
Right.
a way to remember those stores.
So just as far as the society goes, how can somebody join? How many members do you have currently? What's the benefit of joining? I just want to get that out there because I joined and I get your newsletter. So I just want to make sure we talk a little bit about that.
Yet, if you go to creditcollectibles.com, that is our website, there, and there's a lot of information on there about collecting um, in general, and
Mm-hmm.
pictures of cards and about the different types of cards. And there's a place on there to join. And if you do join, you get a newsletter. I send out two or three a year, but then there's a lot of information on our website, with the password protected part of it. If you join, that has all the newsletters that have been put out over the last 30 years. Um, there is, we recorded many of the transactions of credit collectibles that were been on
Mm-hmm.
eBay over the past 20 years or so. So, say if
Yeah.
you've got some cards, you want to go on there and see what they sold for at different times. It's a good resource to figure out the value of cards.
I know, just looking at the collection you have behind you, I mean, a lot of those I imagine are very difficult to find.
Yeah, there's many that I've just seen one time, and
Right.
but that so when you see them, you have to try to buy them because you might not see one again. In a lot of
Right.
cases.
And of course, the link will be in the description below. So I encourage anyone to go check that out. The first thing I think is really interesting is even before cards, right? There were other items that people paid with that were not cash or checks, if as a payment device or a way to, I guess, make credit purchases. And those are coins, right?
Yeah, there was. I mean, and this has been a big debate in the hobby. We don't know. Yeah, I assume paper. There were some paper cards that probably came first, and coins um, came around probably in the 1890s. late 1880s, 1890s. We don't know for sure. Nobody's figured that out exactly, which doesn't think it makes the hobby interesting because new things are always showing up. New information shows up. Now this is from some paperwork we've seen. We know a coin like this is from Abraham and Straus, which is a department store in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay.
That coins like this were issued in the late 1800s.
So how would that be used? I'm curious how someone would use that.
Well, I mean, of course, there was no name on there. It's just an account number. So you walked up and you bought something, and they got the number off the coin. And, I'm not sure. I guess some stores maybe had a list where they went and checked the list and be sure that, you had an open to buy amount. And they just, wrote out a receipt, put it, and then it was sent up to billing. Now they could have had a way at the time where they called up to the credit office. I know when I was little, I remember a local store even doing that when I was little, when they called up to the office to see, to be sure they were overdue on their bill or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And now, I will show this. Hopefully, I'm sorry, the glare won't be too bad. This is the oldest dated card that I've got from 1897, I believe. 1896. 1896. It's the Depot Carriage and Baggage Company from Kansas City. And you could rent a carriage with this card.
That's insane.
So it just amazes me to think that somebody was in a horse and buggy was carrying a credit card around. And the back of the card, you read it, it's just like today's credit card. It says, it has to be used by the issuer. It's got a lot of the rules on it are very much like what you'd see, later on a credit card.
Well, that's what it sounds like, even with the coins or that card in particular. What we've automated today is not a different process. There's a validation to make sure it's a good card and there's available credit.
It's all the same, yes.
All of that is the same. It's just been more automated than it was back then.
Now, what I want to be sure to show here while we're on coins, I think these are very interesting, and they're very sought after by collectors. And there's a lot of guys that are just coin collectors only. They might not collect anything else, but they like the coins, and that's a hobby that's been around a long time. But here's a couple. They're shaped like keys, and one of these is to the Gray Taxi Company, and one of them is to the Columbia Taxi. So basically, you carried that around, and you got in a taxi cab and charged your ride. That kind of sounds familiar to something we do today. So this is your Uber of 1920 or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So you don't have to carry cash. It kind of makes sense. Yeah.
And this was to a hat store, and it's shaped like a hat. So they're a lot they're always sought after because there's something more than just a round coin. Here's one shaped like a shirt. Hopefully you can see that. It's not too much glare. It's shaped like
a shirt,
right. It's like a coat, a suit coat or something. That's to a clothing store, and this was kind of a generic coin. Different clothing stores used this style coin. And there's some others that look like a shirt or look like a shoe. There's several figural charge coins.
That's crazy.
Yeah, they're very interesting.
And I imagine you might see something like that, at some type of a store, like a resale store or a consignment store or something, and not even know what it is.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, before I started collecting, I knew that. I didn't know they existed. And a lot of the charge coin collectors, one of the things they spend a lot of time doing is trying to figure out if a coin is a charge coin, because there were a lot of identification coins and good luck charm coins. There's all kinds of tokens or coins issued, and sometimes it takes some time to determine if they were really a charge coin or not.
So the coins, though, were they typically issued by a specific merchant, like just used at one type of a merchant?
Yes.
I guess except for the taxis, maybe that would Well, even then, it could be a
They're
specific taxi
just a
company.
certain taxi company. There was like
Yeah.
a Shaw livery company out of
Yeah.
St. Louis issued different ones. This, it's a gray taxi, Lincoln Taxi, or just some of the names off the top of my head. But there were quite a few taxi companies that issued the coins. This is going way back for a minute, but I'll just show this since I have it out. This is the air travel card. This is the airline industry's first time
That's in the 30s too. That's
this
crazy.
is and initially you sent in money to this program, like the company sent in money and you kind of banked the money with them, and then they debited it out as you used this, if that makes
Oh, I
sense.
see. Yeah, almost like a
But it was a
prepaid.
way for
Yeah.
sort of initially, but then it turned into a regular credit card
Yeah. Yeah.
over the years. But that's the 1936 is when their travel card started, and we did leave out oil companies out of the, now since I have got this out. I know I'm going back a lot. This is like a 1919, 1920 oil
Sammy's.
company card. Sammy's, yes, very small company. We don't know exactly when the first gas card was issued. There's rumors Texaco issued one in 1914. What has not ever surfaced, but there has been some research. But anyway, that's another very early card. I had that. And then one thing we need to I want to talk about real quickly before we go to Diners Club, because it's a very important part of the story, are the charge plates. They're the metal. So here's one. This is from Filene's,
Interesting.
Boston, Massachusetts. It's a metal plate.
And now is that a piece of paper inside of it?
There's a piece of paper slipped in, but it's metal on the back with the address, the name and address of the account holder imprinted on it or embossed.
Nice.
So,
Interesting.
and this, as far as I know, like this is the first charge plate. This is 1928, 1929 time that the Filene's, they were the first store to issue a charge plate. And the important thing about the charge plate, so you've got this embossed name and address on here.
Right, right.
So this is the first time they were able to transfer the name and address mechanically onto the charge slip. So the whole idea was to make it quicker, so that the sales clerk was not having to write down a number. So you're reducing the amount of mistakes made by writing down the wrong number. It was all about quickness and accuracy. So that's a very important, part of the progression of the technology.
Now, did they have carbon paper? Did they try to? Do you know, like, if they just wrote it down from that, or if they had some type of carbon paper or way to take the imprint?
I think they did have, they had some carbon paper where I think the customer got a copy and then a copy stayed with the store and they sent it up to to billing. A couple of the old companies did it for a little while. Here's a Gulf charge plate from 1930. Gulf Oil, they're still around, obviously, and we went in a little case. So here's it's got the Gulf emblem on it.
Oh, nice.
So the old companies didn't do it for very long, though, but the charge plate stayed into use. It was the most common card used by stores, from the 30s up into the late 50s, early 60s.
So for a long time, those must have been.
Yeah.
Do you think that those became more common than the coins during that time?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Probably by the 19 and another thing, like all these technologies, they didn't, like, 1 year that they stopped and everybody quit doing coins and they went to charge plates.
Sure.
Different stores did it at different times.
Mm-hmm.
So, most stores by the 1930s or 40s got away from charge coins and switched to the charge plates. I know that I've read though that Abraham and Strauss, which I showed that charge coin a minute ago, they kept using charge coins up into the late 1960s, but that was very unusual.
Right, right.
But it's different. Every store, like today, everybody adapts technology at a different time. You don't. Right. Everybody doesn't do it at the same time.
Right. Not every store takes a contactless card or a mobile wallet.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, all right. So there's the coins, then the charge plates.
The charge plates is kind of interesting. Some charge plates are just issued by a single store, and you can just use it at that store. But there was also a service called the Charge Plate Associates, where each city had a Charge Plate Association, and one plate could be used at multiple stores. And
Interesting.
there was like a central billing office in each major city, and even some pretty small cities had it. And there was a notch. There was a notch on the card that showed you how to put it in the machine, and then the different stores had their own shaped notch. So when it set it down into the machine, if there was a notch to coincide with that store, then that meant you had an account at that store and that they knew they could take the plate.
That's interesting.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It seems like today, by today's standards, it would be pretty easy probably to, conduct fraud in a situation like that. But back then, I imagine that they didn't have to worry as much. Often,
not as much, I'm sure. Yeah.
They would almost know who that person was a lot of times.
In a lot of cases, yes, they probably would. Yes.
So, all right. So charge coins, charge plates, and there were city-wide agreements, I guess, in place to where you could make purchases, not everywhere, but any merchant that accepted that type of payment. And so that was the first. I mean, that was a multi-merchant. That was what we think of today as a card, where you can use it anywhere almost.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, still, I don't think that the stores were paying a percentage of the sales or anything yet. I don't think they were to that point. I'm not sure exactly. There's not a lot of information on those charge of plate associations and that company. I've done a lot of research, and there's just not a lot of information still around about how that worked.
People start to pass away, and all that history gets lost and forgotten.
Exactly.
You think of Diners Club, which is, I have this sign right here. Diners Club as being the first credit card, and in some ways it kind of is, but the concept actually was not brand new at that time. It's not like the idea of credit payment devices had not existed before, but it was unique. Is that right?
Yes, it was the first company that could be used at multiple places, but it was a separate company that was like a middleman that charged the store. They took a percentage of the sale. That's how they made their money, plus an annual fee, and then they billed the customer. So it was a third party. It was the first time there was a third party involved, in the transaction. Now there were some. I was going to say there were some banks that started doing that around the same time. There was some bank that got into the credit card business around the same time as Diners Club.
But that's not Bank AmeriCard was later, right? And
it was later, yes.
Carte Blanche was later, I guess. Too.
Right.
But between those events, between those, and American Express coming out, there were other banks that attempted to try to do what Diners Club was doing as well.
Right. So here's I'll show a few examples. So this is a 1951 expiration Diners Club, and they were booklets. So the front of the card is the card, but you opened it up, and everywhere where the card could use was listed inside.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like, and as it went along, it got thicker and thicker over time. This is an early one, but it's pretty thin, because it was just, although it was already still more just used in more of the cities than just New York. Even in 1951, they grew pretty quickly. And there's a couple of more of these that exist of this December of 51. I don't know of anybody. There's a couple of others like this one this same year, but as far as I know, nobody's ever found any that are older than this one. But I know there were some that when I've read, the very first one was just a card, and it just had the listings on the back of the card where you could use it, because it was just a few restaurants right around New York City, just in a certain area, geographic area. None of those have ever turned up yet. So supposedly the first one there was maybe just 200 issued. So the chances that any of those have survived are pretty low.
It was more than restaurants. I mean, it started as a restaurant.
It started as restaurants, yeah, but it changed pretty quickly, where they started adding stores didn't start being issued using Diners Club. That was a while before stores ever took a Diners Club card, because they didn't want to take another card. They wanted their customers to use their card. They didn't want to be paying somebody else. Sure. The 6%. I think that's what they charged initially, was 6% of the sale, which seems, I guess, high now.
Today about the 2% or 3%.
Yeah, because the restaurants particularly complain, because they usually run on low margins anyway.
Yeah,
restaurants do, and there was a lot of pushback, but it became so important that they got to where they had to take them, or they were going to lose business.
It's interesting. Yeah.
But by the mid-'50s, they had added rental car companies, airlines started, but they came before the stores as far as, what Diners Club, where it could be used.
Now, and we'll move on. I'd love to, kind of go through the history from Diners Club and talk about Bank of America, MasterCharge, and American Express. They all came out. Yep. You're right. Very important. But the history of Diners Club. Frank McNamara, I think, is the name of the person that started it. Went to a restaurant with his wife, or this is the story. He didn't have any cash, so she had to pay, I think is the way it worked. And because that embarrassed him, he and some others decided to start Diners Club. But you've spoken to the person who created that story. Is that right? And not that it matters whether it's true or not, because, legend is, it becomes fact after a while. But what is the true story around that?
Well, Frank McNamara was from what I've read, he was a interesting entrepreneur. He was trying new things, and he had a finance company, and somehow he had the idea just to start issuing a card. Now, exactly what his motivation was, I'm not sure, but I know when they started the card, Matty Simmons, who was the first vice president of marketing, he was the one that came up with the story. And I did get to speak to him 4 or 5 years ago before he passed away. And he has a book that he wrote. He talks about that. But he told me, on the phone, he said, "Yeah, I made that up." And to this day, it's still on their website. That's how the company started.
Yeah, own it.
It's just too good a story, I guess.
Right. I mean, and that story just keeps getting told as the fact. But
before we got on here, I would look something up about that, and I found one reference to it, and they even said that they told him he was going to have to wash dishes, which is the old joke about, if you don't have any money. But somebody actually has added that to the story, that they told him he was going to have to wash dishes.
Well, Well, that's funny. We can just keep adding to that story.
Yeah.
It almost doesn't even matter if it's true or not. It's just interesting because that story gets told over and over again. And that really is the origin of cards, in a way. As far as I know, unless you know something different, that's where credit cards and charge cards started.
Yeah, the Diners Club and and those bank cards. That's what started what the credit card industry is today.
So let's go through the 50s, because Diners Club started, and then what was next? Show us. I'd love to see some more examples if you have anything else. Yeah.
So I guess it wasn't too many years after Diners Club started. They were becoming more and more popular, more and more used. American Express saw, they had their traveler's checks, and they saw this growing credit card business as it's going to affect their traveler's check business. So that's why they decided that they had to. And there were several years. There was a couple of other companies. In fact, before American Express, there were several other companies that started their own cup card. There were There was Esquire Club, which is Esquire Magazine, had a credit card. The Duncan Hines Signet Club, which was named after the Duncan Hines of the cake mix
Sure.
name. And there was a Gourmet Guest Club, had a credit card that was from Gourmet Magazine. So everybody, because of Diners Club was growing so much, everybody was trying to get in on it. But none of them were very successful. They were always small. When American Express decided to get into it in 1958, this was a big company with a lot of money, and they were the ones that really were the first serious competition to Diners Club. And when American Express issued their first card in 58, pretty much all these other smaller companies either got bought by Diners Club or by American Express pretty quickly, and it consolidated down to those two companies in the what you would call, and that category is called the travel and entertainment cards. Is what they were generally called, as opposed to a bank card. They were travel and entertainment cards because they were mostly used by executives for travel, for business use. Not as much, by stores or things like that. It was mostly hotels, restaurants, airlines, really, or that type of thing.
Diners Club is still issued, just not in the United States, but they're still, both of those, American Express and Diners Club, are still seen as premium products. Like, they're premium card products. It sounds like they always have been.
Right. And so here's the paper American Express card. They were first issued in September of 1958. That's when they were first mailed out. And they just issued these paper cards for 1 year, and then they switched to plastic. Depending on when you applied, but I guess it really was just for 6 months that they issued the paper card, because they did switch. They did switch to plastic, sometime after April of 1959.
Now, were they the first to issue plastic cards?
A lot of places on the internet will say that the American Express card was the first plastic credit card. But I think because it was their first plastic credit card, that kind of people took that as being the first plastic credit card. And the first plastic credit cards, that's a subject that's I've studied a lot. I don't have a definitive answer, but it was sometime around 1955, 1956.
Okay.
When and the important thing about that is there were some plastic type cards before that, but what was important about that was that they had come up with a plastic that could be embossed. That was the big technological advancement. They figured out a thickness of plastic that could be embossed. It wasn't going to crack or break. You could put it in your wallet, and and
it's interesting to think of, because right now, credit cards, the thickness is very specific. And, I've always just imagined that, it has to be the perfect size so that it can be slid through the slot in a certain way. But I wonder if it's actually the thickness has more to do with the embossing, and that just has retained, that thickness.
I think,
that's very interesting.
Yeah, I think it all had to do with embossing to come up with the right. Now the size, and there were some early cards that were a little bigger, a little smaller. I'm not sure. There was a size card called the princess sized card. I don't know if I have one of those, but it was a smaller card. A lot of department stores used that size card, but most the gas companies and most of the banks mostly used the regular standard size card that's still in use today.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's almost by chance, the size card we have today, the thickness of the card, all of that, just it was set so long ago. It may or may not have a specific reason. We've just kind of maintained those standards since then.
Like the American Express paper card, it's bigger than a standard size card.
Oh, is it?
So it would not fit in the average, man's wallet of the time, but yeah, I guess that's some stuff that's hard to figure out.
Yeah.
I don't know the definitive answers on some of that.
Now with the plastic, and you'd mentioned this before, there's you there's holes, and there's some examples you have where it looks like it's almost like a computer type.
Yes, I've got a few examples of that. Like this card is probably from the 1970s. This is a
Okay.
Montgomery Ward card, and it has the holes, like the IBM key punch
Mm-hmm.
cards, and this particular type of card was actually used with a certain NCR cash register, and it's got the cut corner, so you know the correct way to put it on
Right.
it like laid down on the register, and light went through the holes and read the account number,
Oh,
and then it transferred that to the receipt. Now, before that, back starting around 1960, there was another. Now, I hope this shows up, but there are some in the hobby, we call those computer bumps. There's some
okay.
rectangular embossed bumps that
Right.
coincide with the number, and I've seen cards as early as 1960 that now they weren't read by the register, but those bumps were imprinted onto the carbon paper
Mm-hmm.
just like the numbers were, and then they had computers that could read these series of bumps, so they were
Interesting.
able to automate
Right.
they ran the receipts that were sent in to a central billing office. They ran them through some kind of, and the computer could read them
Yeah.
and do all the billing and send out the bills.
It's interesting because, like we, kind of talked about this before with the coins, where it was manually writing something down to calling someone and verifying account information, and moving forward to having some automation. It just seems like the industry was attempting to insert automation into this process from the
Sure.
very beginning.
Yes, and it is these companies got bigger, and like gas companies had stations all across the country. They had to come up with a way to automate it somewhat. It was just, you can imagine how much paperwork and how much manpower it
Right.
took to
Absolutely.
to do all that billing,
Right.
manually.
Um. So we have, what happened in, the 50s and all the cards that came out. Do you have, I'm curious, so MasterCharge became MasterCard.
Right.
Bank AmeriCard became Visa. You have any early examples of some of those transitions?
Yes. Well, let me show you first. So this is an interesting card. This is the Chase Manhattan Charge Plan. They were first issued around 1958. Same time American Express, Bank AmeriCard. So obviously Chase is still in the business today
Sure.
in a
Right.
pretty
Right.
big way. So this is Chase's first credit card. This is what it looked like, the Chase Manhattan Charge Plan.
Interesting.
Um, and this is a very special card. So this is a Bank AmeriCard. This expired in March of 1959,
Okay.
and they were issued in September of 1958 for the first time. So this is the first card that ended up being Visa. This is the first one. And I just know of a couple of these in existence.
And that's
So these were
plastic, obviously.
yes, yeah. Bank AmeriCard started out with plastic.
Okay.
The Bank America did a test market and you can find a lot of this information about. It's pretty well known. In Fresno, California, in September of 1958, they did a test market in that town to see if the card would be successful, and they pretty quickly extended it all over California. But for a long time, it was only in California until
that
they
first
started adding other banks.
In that test market, no applications, right? They just mailed those.
They just mailed those to anybody that had a Bank of America checking account. And I guess they did a credit check. And they went around and got as many merchants before they even issued the card, as many merchants as they could to, to get them signed up to accept the card.
Yeah.
And they got them to accept the card by telling them, we're just going to send this card out. We're not, everybody's got a checking account. Bank of America had a pretty big market share in California, period, at the time.
Right.
So if they sent one out to every checking account customer they had, it was a lot of people, in that town. So that's how they got, and this cards went out like unsolicited.
Right.
A live card came in the mail to you, ready to use, with a credit limit, and they could do that up until about 1970 or 1971. Banks or stores, anybody could send out a live card. That wasn't outlawed until around 1970 or 71. Whether you had to, apply or send in something first. They couldn't just send out a card, because obviously a lot of cards were stolen and used, and there weren't any laws in place yet to protect you from fraudulent credit card use. So I know there was a lot of problems with that.
So someone
early on.
So back then, you could potentially have an unsolicited card sent to you. Someone could take that and steal it and go use it, and there's nothing protecting you from liability in a sense.
Not a specific law. Now, I imagine they were able to argue a way out of that, probably. But that was also new.
Right.
It was something new. They hadn't got around to making the laws yet.
Now we have prepaid, debit. You mentioned phone cards earlier, but we have cards to access available funds. We have charge cards, credit cards, metal cards. Anything else between then and maybe the 80s or 90s that was interesting that kind of talks to the evolution of how we've gotten to where we are.
Now, obviously, the magnetic strip is a important, probably the biggest technological change, and that is very hard to figure out. You do some research on magnetic stripes. Who had the first one? There's a lot of people that claim they invented it. There's a lot of, and it's hard to tell who had the first magnetic stripe on a card. It was somewhere in the late 60s, 68, 69, 70, in that time frame is when they started being used.
So when Bank Americard went out, it was the same as others. Either it was taking carbon paper to read the embossing and to store that and to get a signature, or someone was writing it. And then at some point, the magnetic stripe was intended to automate all of that. So the idea when they swiped that card, even in the 60s, was there some communication happening?
Initially the magnetic stripe was put on the cards so they could be used in an ATM machine.
Ah, I see.
That was around late 1960s is when ATM machines first started being used, and that was the primary use of the magnetic stripe. Now, sometime in the early 70s, there were different experiments, test pilot programs for point-of-sale authorization. There was a way they took the phone through the phone line, and they had a box there, and they put the phone down on the on the box, and had the buttons they pushed where it was charged, and then they called in to some kind of early point-of-sale authorization. But that came along probably more into the mid-70s, I would say, before that became more common.
So the magnetic stripes added mostly for the ATMs, and then obviously there's some transition or the value is seen in that as a way to make purchases. I remember, I've been in banking for a little over 20 years. When I first started, we were still selling. We were still distributing what they call the knuckle busters, like the little things to read the cards, and that really wasn't that long ago. And I imagine you might still see some of those around. Technically, I assume that they're a valid way to pay.
But yeah, there probably are a few out there somewhere in some small stores. Yeah, when I worked at Sears when I was in college, and if the card, there were still people that had cards that didn't have the magnetic stripe, and we had to imprint those cards, if they didn't have the magnetic stripe. Where I work now, we take credit cards, and it still comes up if we manually put in the account number if we don't have the customer in there with us, and we're manually putting it still comes up on that machine, imprint card.
That's
to
crazy.
This day, but nobody's had an imprint for a long time. But it still comes up on there. It says imprint card. If you choose that the card is not present when you're making a charge. I think that's pretty funny. But.
Well, anything else? Anything we missed? And I'm trying to think. I would love to see any other examples of cards you have. I have a couple here that I was gonna share. Nothing compared to what you have, of course, but some interesting products. And I can't find my payment ring, but now, there's wearables, there's rings you can pay with, contactless, bracelets, and everything's kind of changing a little bit.
Sure. Let me go back. I have a couple of pieces here before back to the 60s, to the bank cards. So Bank of America, is doing well in California. Mm-hmm. At the time, there were banking laws where you couldn't do business in another state. I'm not sure when all that state, the interstate banking laws or whatever they called them. And so Bank of America decided to franchise, I guess you would say, the Bank AmeriCard program to other banks in other states.
Interesting.
This happened around 1966 when they started doing this. There was probably 8 or 10 banks in different cities, Philadelphia. I'd have to think a minute some of the other. But anyway, there were about a dozen other banks that started issuing Bank AmeriCards. And some other banks in California found out that they were about to do this, and they decided they needed to get together and start their own credit card program. There were four banks: Wells Fargo, which is obviously still a major player in this country, and there were 3 other banks. They're probably all changed names. Like this was in July of 1967 when they first sent out MasterCharge cards, and this is one from Wells. So this is going to be one of the first. This expired in November of 67. This is going to be one of the first MasterCharge cards ever issued.
So the interbank card, and it was, so I guess I did not realize it was created as a way to compete against how quickly Bank AmeriCard was growing.
That's right. And coincidentally, over on the East Coast, there were a group of banks actually that got together to form a credit card program, and that was really Interbank. It was on the East Coast. A group of 7 or 8 banks got together in 1966, in Buffalo, New York. There was a company called Midland Bank that was a big New York bank. They were kind of one of the main ones that got everybody together, and they found out what MasterCharge was doing in California, and they linked up, and that's how MasterCharge became an interbank card, and they had the I on the back there, and so that meant if you got issued this card in California, you could go to these other cities for the first time and use this card in another state. Because Bank of AmeriCard was doing the same thing, so they decided they needed to get together and compete with Bank of America. So
that's intriguing. So MasterCharge was not called the Interbank card when it was first launched. It was just MasterCharge.
Well, it was just because it was coincidentally they just started around the same time, and they kind of that's a whole interesting story. Yeah, they kind of joined forces early on. Wanted to show this other. Now, some of the banks were still, not all of them were not going with Bank of America yet or with MasterCharge. Some of them were still trying to keep their own card, and so this is the First National City Everything card from around, I think, 1967, This
It has
is
the same
Citibank.
colors as the Bank America card almost.
Yeah, and I don't know how they got away with that because there was
Yeah, right.
no connection, but they were obviously trying to compete with them.
Right,
But
sure.
this is Citibank's. They're
Oh,
obviously still
interesting.
a big
Yeah,
player, in the
huge.
business. This was their first bank card that they
Right.
issued. Although they did buy carte blanche early on and owned them for
They
a
did.
few years.
Yeah.
They tried several different ways to get into the credit card business in the
Right.
'60s. I think there was an antitrust issue, and they made them sell carte blanche
I
because
see.
of that. That's when they issued their everything card. It just lasted a few years, and then they started issuing master charges. So
I see.
by the early '70s, just about every bank. There was a few exceptions that kept their own bank card, local bank card, but just about all the banks either went with the Bank America card or with master charge.
Oh,
Pretty
that's
much.
interesting. Yeah, and that's still the way it is today for the most part.
Right.
Especially with
Most of the
debit and yeah.
Sure. Most of the banks that had already had some kind of credit card program in place, most of them went with master charge. The banks that had not been in the business at all, most of them went with Bank America card.
Interesting.
Because MasterCharge was more of a loose association of the banks, where Bank America card was a little more. They pretty much they used to use their whole program completely. And if you're starting from scratch, you use the Bank America card program. So.
Any other? Because I know Carte Blanche. If I'm not mistaken, Discover owns them now. I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah, there you
here's
go.
an early. This is not the first one I've got in a frame, so I couldn't get it out. But this is
Yeah.
early '60s, and they were started by Hilton Hotels,
Ah, interesting.
because they saw what Diners Club and these other were doing, and they wanted to have a card where the people didn't have to use the Diners Club or the American Express at
Sure.
their hotel or whatever. So they issued a multi-purpose card. Sheraton almost issued one, but they ended up just going with Diners Club. These are kind of interesting. We're going to go way ahead here, but you were talking about different types of
Yeah.
cards. This is a This is a pay pass. This is actually put on your
okay.
key ring, and it was a contactless.
Right.
These were probably issued, I think, 15 years ago. And here's another version that goes on your
Now I have seen
key
that.
ring.
Yeah, absolutely.
I found an article on this because people were complaining that once you were done with it, it was hard to destroy the thing. It's so durable. They
Yeah.
couldn't hardly break it in half or whatever which people usually do with their cards. They couldn't figure out how to destroy the thing, so nobody would use it.
So I'll show my examples I have here. I only have a few interesting ones. So this I got this issue, this Discover card.
Right.
It has my name on it, but I can blur that out. Anyways, yeah, and it goes on your key ring,
Right.
And when you're ready to use it, you just kind of open it up and you swipe.
Do have a couple of versions of that. There was
Yeah,
two that looked very similar. I'm not sure how long but I don't think they were used for 3 or 4 years or so, I would say.
And then this is this is more than anything. It's just it's a card that the only plutonium card that I'm familiar with. I have a few of
You're
those.
you're not gold, you're not platinum, but you're
No,
plutonium.
plutonium, man. And then, of course, I don't know if you've seen the tree card. Now, I got mine wet, so you can see the damage on it, but it's made of wood.
Oh no, now that I've
So,
not ever seen that
yeah.
before.
You can still get these. You can go to Tree Card
Oh
and to their website. Yeah, I'm sure you want to add that to your collection.
yeah, I do
You
definitely.
you do. It's it has the
Collect
chip
credit
on
cards.
it.
You have to keep a good credit
Right.
rating so you can
I know,
go
right?
apply for these cards.
You're always applying. They're like, oh, he keeps. But yeah, the tree card was interesting. They say it's better for the environment to use. But yeah, I would check that out.
I will. I will definitely.
Yeah. So, and yeah, I just think it's so interesting, and even the packaging is getting very creative, right? So the packaging, you open it up and there it is, and It's just crazy. A lot of it seems like, it's kind of gimmicky. Like, this is kind of gimmicky to me. This right? Maybe it'll get you to use it more, by having something different, being able to pull out a wooden card, or even the how they have, cards have the orange or different colors on the side. All that's to get you to use it more. But I think what's even more interesting is what we've been talking about with the way that technology has changed the efficiency and the effectiveness of that card, to where, now you have a card, it's gonna, within less than a second, you're gonna know that transaction's approved. You almost know before you go into any place. You don't have to question whether or not it's going to work. And it all started, back then with the very early ones, where we're just going from merchant to merchant, to where now Bank Americard became Visa, MasterCharge became MasterCard. These are, you have Discover here in the U.S. is widely accepted. American Express. It doesn't matter what kind of card you have, almost. Any other examples or anything that we haven't talked about?
Well, again, I'll jump around here a little bit, but just a couple of things I had pulled out. Technology-wise, this was a Bank of Delaware card, used a very short period of time, but before the magnetic stripe, this was an attempt to, this card went into a machine, and the holes were read by a machine. Like I said, this is around 1967 or so. So it was a pretty early attempt for this to go into a machine and have some kind of early authorization,
Right.
What is that? But it was very limited. This is like a sample card that came from the company that manufactured the cards.
That's interesting.
But this is the technology is interesting.
Right, yeah. You'd have to have a special reader, I imagine.
Yes, yeah. And that was all, very, very early, very, I've read some that the stuff was almost handmade,
Right.
because they just, like that card, there probably wasn't a dozen stores that took that card, and, and
right.
they very limited production of a machine, to use that card.